Hello everyone, welcome to the Chicago Burlington and Quincy Railroad and the Chicago and Northwestern Railway in Wyoming. Today is July 3rd, 2024, and this is Layout Update number 56. I'm Mark Pruitt, Bridge Inspector. I spent nearly all of June working on the, wait for it, staging yard again. Yes, it just never seems to end. In fact, I'm still not done with it, but I've taken a break from it for a couple of weeks. You'll see how far along it is now in a couple minutes. During the downtime from the staging yard, I've been installing some new skyboard. I hosted an operating session on June 25th and attended a train show in Cheyenne on the 30th. Oh, and the 25th of June was the 4th anniversary of the start of layout construction. I've always done an annual recap on that day, and this year I completely spaced it out. I'll put a belated birthday video together this month, but it might be a couple of weeks yet. I have a bunch of medical tests scheduled all month long. At the last update, I just finished laying the track on the lead to east staging. We'll pick right back up there. I finished the short section of track on the west staging lead right after the last video posted. The area looked like this. In fact, pretty much the entire train room did. I had to stop and devote some time to cleaning up. Early in June, I began working on the control panel. I'll use the frame and a lot of the internal barrier strips from the old one from version 2 of the layout for the new staging yard panel. First thing was to put together the graphics for the new panel face. I spent several days on this using PowerPoint. The panel face is about 11 by 17 inches. I had this printed at FedEx office. 2 copies are sitting in the library waiting to be used. Once the new face was ready, I began tearing the old panel apart. This is what the inside of it looked like when I started. After cutting out the old wiring and removing all the panel components, the inside looked like this. About a third of the barrier strips will be removed, but the power supply and associated wiring powers the LEDs, so they'll remain. I removed the old panel face, and I'm left with this for now. I've already bought new acrylic panels for the new face. Next step is to cut them to size and begin drilling the panels for the LEDs and switches. This is where I stopped on the panel for the time being. On June 11th, Dave came down again to help me with the staging yard. It was time to raise it to final position and level it. You know, I'm not sure what was in that bottle of water, but it sure must have tasted funny. We used several different carpenter's levels, measuring both transversely across the yard and lengthwise along it. We worked from the west end of the yard to the east end. The yard is flat, but it has about a 1/2 degree grade downwards from west to east. We got the yard leveled in the morning. That only took a couple of hours. Dave measured the flatness on top of the yard, while I rolled around underneath and adjusted things from below. The east end yard lead was still supported like this. That wouldn't do. So in the afternoon, we began adding the permanent supports. Here, Dave is clamping supports in place under Wind River Canyon. We permanently installed all the vertical pieces, but just clamped the horizontal ones in place. I still had to go all the way back to Holly Sugar to set the grade on the entire lead. After that, we ran a long refrigerator train all the way from the west lead across the yard to the end of the east staging lead near Powell. Everything rolled smoothly. There were no derailments. On the 12th, I had to go back and readjust the elevation of the yard a bit. The west end lead had about a 4% grade in it near the yard. It took maybe an hour to readjust everything. Then I was able to finish the supports for both the entire east lead and the west lead within about 3 feet of the yard. Here's a couple of the east supports near the staging yard. I clamped the sub-road bed to the horizontal pieces after applying some carpenter's glue, then clamped the horizontal to the vertical pieces until the glue dried. After that, I went back and screwed the supports together. Back in the May update, I talked about how I would need to replace the electronics in one of the Blueline Mikados I got from the folks in Sheridan. Since I had an operating session coming up later in the month, it was time to get that locomotive into service. Here's the original soundboard in the tender. The piece hanging off behind the tender is the motor decoder. I pulled all that out, leaving only the speakers. Then I spent a few hours wiring in the new TCS decoder. Here it is wired into the tender, but not yet fitted in place. Here's the loco sitting on the turntable at Casper with the tender shell removed to show the final install. The wires aren't really neatly folded up, but they're good enough. Both of the Blueline locos performed very well during the operating session. After finishing that Mikado, it was time to get ready for the operating session. It took a couple of days just to clean up the room and the layout. Then it was on to building the trains in JMRI. There were a total of 12 trains for this session. I won't go into a lot of detail about the operating session since I posted a short video about it a couple of days ago. The link is in the description if you're interested. I really wasn't in the mood to work on the control panel after the operating session. I've kind of had enough of the staging yard for a bit. So instead, I began extending the backdrop west from Thermopolis. First, I added 1x2 mounting strips on the walls by Holly Sugar. Then I attached new 090 styrene sheets. The last couple of days, I've been adding supports between Worland and Basin to support the styrene sheets there. And so ended June of 2024. I'll spend the next few days installing more backdrop supports and the styrene sheets at Worland, then probably get back to construction of the control panel for staging, and that will take most of the rest of the month. As always, don't forget the Cronkite segment right after this. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next month. After purchasing our new home in Kent, Washington in late 1987, I jumped right into work on the layout. I mentioned last month that I moved the layout to the new house from the old one we'd been renting. I did have to make an adjustment to the track routing to clear the new furnace, but other than that, I was able to just pick right up where I left off in the old house. With having a family and work and all that stuff, progress on the layout was slow, but there was progress. This is me at 32 years old in December 1998, working on the layout in the new house. By mid-1989, work on the upper level had started. By the end of the year, fascia and backdrops were in place and partially painted. In early 1990, I started building scenery, the last scenery I'd start for well over a decade. It didn't get very far, as a very disruptive chain of events in my personal life occurred, which necessitated the destruction of this layout. And that's the way it was in Kent, Washington, 1988 through 1990.